So Amy D. Wells is an associate professor at the Université de Caen Normandie and member of the research team ERIBIA. Her recent publications include Liberté Francophonie Sexualité, Cinq, écrivaines américaines en Normandie dans l'entre-deux-guerres. And she's president of the Association Nationale des Langues Étrangères Appliquées and treasurer of the Société des anglicistes sur les femmes, le sexe et le genre. So now she's going to introduce us to a specific case from The Man in the High Castle.
Thank you. And I want to thank Georges-Claude again and Kevin again. It's a really great opportunity to come and work with you to talk about all of these different aspects of intersexuality. Excuse me, Freudian slip. Let me try again. Intersectionality. So, I was supposed to be watching The Man in the High Castle for fun and entertainment. But very quickly, the Amazon Prime series had me anxious and even frightened. I had to take a break between season 3 and 4. The visual aspects of the series are extremely striking, and the American Reich flag now seems to be all too real, to be very honest. I have fallen into Philip Kindred Dick's trap, and imagining his proposed alternate history has also become too real. The transposition from page to screen has created a dystopian TV series, and according to Noah Berlatsky, in a January 2015 article, I quote, "The frightening thing isn't the dystopia, it's that the dystopia is so familiar, it doesn't really feel dystopian at all." The character of Juliana Crane, and I just want to correct myself, I worked orally so much on this series that I didn't realize they were spelling her name C-R-A-I-N instead of C-R-A-N-E, which I kind of prefer because I like the link to the crane, but anyway, a change in her name. The character of Juliana is played by Alexa Davalos, who is a Franco-American actress and that she was born in Paris. She slips back and forth between a position of privilege as a white woman in the American Reich, which is also called the Greater Nazi Reich, and a position of submissive minority as a white woman in the Pacific States of America. In the neutral zone, she's just a woman, yet she is sexualized across all 3 territories, suggesting that her sex and gender, or more precisely from a Irigarean perspective, her penetrability, is the most important element of her identity. In this case study, we will analyze how the different layers of race and gender comprising the character's identity emerge to the forefront as she passes from one geographic location to another, and as she shifts between temporal planes. Both the series created by Frank Spotsnitz and the novel by Philip K. Dick present a true Wonder Woman whose evolving character traits are constantly reshuffled, rendering her the pivotal character of the plot and ultimately the heroine of the day. Sorry, can't change my pages here. To say a few words about the technicalities of the series, it was created by Frank Spotsnitz, whom you probably know from The X-Files, produced by Ridley Scott, whom you know from Blade Runner, and this was for Amazon Prime. And I'm really interested in how our TV watching habits have changed with the online demand and downstreaming format that we've had for a couple of years now. We no longer have to wait to know who shot JR. We no longer have to buy DVDs and wait for them to come. Our consummation of TV in general, or what we could call a series, has really changed, and I'm very interested about what impact that has on the experience. I wanted to point out that the series began prior to Trump's election, but has certainly taken on a new meaning since Trump has been elected. We're looking at 40 episodes. And to speak a little bit about genre, we're looking at science fiction, alternate history, Uchronia, and dystopia. And also I'm going to be speaking about these 3 different areas: the Japanese Pacific States, the neutral zone, and the Great Nazi Reich, which can also be called the American Reich. I thought that this type of a mental map that was made by a fan of the series is a good representation of how the space is divided. It's a little bit different from the book, but this is the type of spatial divisions we see in the series. And it's not the focus of the analysis, and I know that's a topic for a whole nother conference, but I wanted to make a few comments about how the series is different from the original text. First of all, to me, the book really does seem timeless. It's set in it's published in 1962, and thus the series is set in 1962. But reading it in 2020, I didn't find it to be that outdated. The Grasshopper Lies Heavy is a book in the book and a film in the series. And maybe you recognize that the grasshopper lies heavy is a reference from a biblical passage from Ecclesiastes, which refers to the end of times or to the end of someone's life. The characters, there are much fewer in the book than there are in the series, and as we've already discussed together with some other people, we see a type of updating by having more details about character sexuality. Some of the characters are homosexual or bisexual in the series, which is not the case in the book. And in the book, Juliana remains Juliana Fink, even though she's technically divorced from Frank. So this is also an explanation for my miss-up on the name, because in the book she's still called Juliana Fink. The alternative planets, the alternative universes, we have some subtle references to that in the book, but they're very concrete and visually stimulating in the series. However, I would like to point out in both that Juliana cuts Joe's throat. This seems to be a unifying factor of both. Okay, this Aikido practicing, throat-slitting, attractive, sexualized female character provides a case study for an intersectionality-based approach to gender within the Amazon Prime series. But is it cheating to take a white female character as an object of intersectional study? We've already had a couple of discussions about this. We had some great examples from Jessica's paper earlier about it's not just white, but other things. And in addition to bearing in mind Kimberly Crenshaw's texts, which were referenced in our call for papers, there have been quite a few books come out in 2019 dealing with different elements of intersectionality. I found Undermining Intersectionality, The Perils of Power-Blind Feminism by Barbara Tomlinson to be particularly useful. She's going to put forward the idea of not just talking about either or, but she suggests instead that we talk about both and. And that was helpful for me to think about using both and instead of either or. The both and conjunctions help us to comprehend the multiple nature of characteristics in an intersectional approach. When it comes to white people, what do we need to include with the both? Of course, in the case of women, we can take gender into consideration, but in his article, A Typology of White People in America, also from 2019, by Matt Ray, which by the way is one essay in a collection of essays called Intersectionality of Whiteness, which I found super interesting. Ray suggests that, quote, whiteness scholars need to find a new framework, one that focuses on the intersections of whiteness with other categories of social difference, like religion, region, cultural, political, and class, for example. Ray goes on to sort white people into a table based on political orientation and perceived color blindness, the two factors he considers most important for his taxonomy. Finally, Ray concludes, quote, whites construct their social identities primarily in relation to other whites, end quote. This summation leads us to wonder to what extent performance of gender or other characteristics is key to the white-on-white economy. Besides for her whiteness, which is ultimately questioned by the greater Nazi Reich, Juliana Crane remains a woman. After her race, her sex and gender seem to be the most important element to her character. Crane's sex renders her a commodity, according to Luce Irigaray. Now, sometimes people don't like for me to talk about Luce Irigaray because she's a 1970s feminist, but I still believe that her texts are relevant today. That's the big joke on us. Although the ensemble of essays from Ce sexe qui n'en est pas un put forward the constant obstacles in society when a person doesn't have a male sex or penis, it is the essay Le Marché des Femmes from Speculum de l'autre femme that posits woman as commodity. Indeed, Irigaray sees women functioning as goods traded between men. La loi qui ordonne notre société, c'est la valorisation exclusive des besoins désirs des hommes et des échanges entre eux. L'échange des femmes convient, accompagne et stimule les échanges d'autres richesses entre les groupes d'hommes. This statement suggests that it is the male-centered needs and desires which dominate the ways in which society is ordered. When female sexuality is non-existent in culture, women become objects of male sexuality and traded as goods between men. Although the other elements of her character will shift places and interact differently according to her location, Juliana's penetrability, her body as a commodity, the desire to possess her sexually, all remain stable across the three zones we're going to talk about. We don't have time to cite the text, but this is also something that's very present in the novel. Speaking of location, as a geocritician, and just as a reminder, geocriticism is the science of literary spaces, I would like to bring something maybe new to the table to argue for the inclusion of space, geography, and location as an element of intersectionality. In Gender, Identity, and Place, Understanding Feminist Geographies, Linda McDowell explains how gender impacts spatial experience. Quote, "Women and men are positioned differently in the world, and that their relationship to the places in which they live is thus different too. These differences are the outcomes of that particular structured set of inequalities that result in women's inferiority to and oppression by men in different places at different times." McDowell's work has been important for getting people to understand how women and men experience the same place differently according to the inequalities. Linda Johnston and Robin Longhurst offer some concrete examples of how that could work, explaining that sexual politics code places. Whether it is a bar, casino, or home, sexual politics permeate the space. There are no spaces that sit outside of sexual politics. Sex and space cannot be decoupled. Place and sexuality are mutually constituted. Sexuality has a profound effect on the way people live in and interact with space and place. In turn, space and place affect people's sexuality. In our study today, the places are not bars or casinos, but three different territories in Philip K. Dick's alternative history. And I just want to say here, I tried to make kind of a graphic of what would be a hand of cards, or actually I play more American mahjong than cards, or so a set of tiles. But I was thinking about how in intersexuality, all of these elements get reshuffled according to the space that you're in. So if you're trying to make a new mahjong hand and you reorder your tiles, if you draw a card, you reorder the order of the cards in your hand. And I was thinking about how all these elements constitute our hand, the hand of our identity. Okay, so we're going to be looking at three different Juliana Cranes. We have Juliana Crane of the Japanese Pacific States, Juliana Crane of the neutral zone. You'll recognize the Colorado state flag for that because this is one of the main areas of the neutral zone, and then also the Great Nazi Reich. Juliana Crane has different partners, different sexual partners in each zone, sometimes the same partner in all three zones. John Smith is always out for Juliana Crane in all three zones. In the Japanese Pacific State, she's a white submissive woman. She passes to become a white privileged woman after her racial identification. She's always a political resistant. Sometimes she has longer hair, sometimes she has shorter hair. The fact that her hair caught my attention was not a surprise because I saw on Pinterest you can have Juliana Crane hair if you follow the steps that they give you on Pinterest. So her hairstyle has definitely caught the attention of the audience. And then also her dress. I'm thinking about what we spoke about with Sonia's paper yesterday. We have a very important fashion clue about what she's wearing to which zone she's in. Of course, I've chosen too many extracts, so we'll go quickly and not watch everything today. But I want you to listen for how Juliana's sensei says, "It requires skill, not strength. That is how a woman can defeat a man twice her size."
That's right. Only your ego is bruised. This is the beauty of Aikido. It is not about harming your opponent. It does not attack. It defends. It requires skill, not strength, to turn your opponent's aggression against them. That is how a woman can defeat a man twice the size.
So this characteristic of Juliana Crane, and by the way, I just noticed you guys don't really have the right screen. Do you want me to try to change? Okay. The fact that she can defend herself physically is going to be very important across all three zones. It's also a good example of how she has assimilated into Asian culture of the Japanese states. And it's also a sign of her physical strength. Now, according to Kyle Arnold, the character of Juliana is based on Anne, the third of Dick's five wives, and she herself was a martial arts instructor. So this idea that the character is based on his wife and that she's a Aikido instructor in the series and in the book seems to really be an important element of her physical strength. Now, this is nothing new, no matter where you live, but Juliana is required to give sex acts in exchange for a job.
You hear about a job too? My name is Juliana Crane. I don't know if you have any positions available at the moment, Mr. Ector. But I'd like to be considered for anything suitable. I type pretty well. I speak some Japanese. I'm a fast learner.
Stand. Remove your coat. There may be a role you are suited to, subject to references, here in personnel. Alongside your other work, it would involve undertaking certain personal services, as and when I require them.
What kind of services?
You wish to work here?
Yes, sir.
It is an honor for a girl like you to be employed here.
I know that, sir.
It is not for you to question your duties. You simply do.
Okay, I think we can go ahead and stop there. You get the idea. And just to be very precise, Juliana Crane wants to work in this building because she has an objective of obtaining information for the resistance. So it's not just out of economic interest, it's also for a political interest. And here we see the man has told her it is an honor for a girl like you to be employed here. Okay. Why don't we move forward to an example from what Juliana Crane looks like in the American Reich, so you can see how physically she looks different. She has to undergo a medical exam because she does not have papers to prove her ethnicity.
Genealogy records? I don't have any genealogy records.
You don't have any.
No, I'm from the Pacific States. They don't keep records like that there.
I'm gonna need you to go on this.
I think there's been a mistake. I applied for political asylum. Protestant. I'll be back with the doctor in a moment.
Head height, 200 millimeters. Mandible width, 150 millimeters. My skull with oval facial form. Olive complexion with slight tone of yellow, right to left at the oculi, strong, long hair, round, slight tone of yellow. Where's 30? Triplet area.
I'm not sure. Maybe.
Initial assessment, maybe group 2 assessment, group 3. Training, nutrition, features. Difficult face. What are all these?
They escaped the resistance. They didn't tell you that.
But these are older scars. What caused them?
I was hit by a bus a couple of years ago.
Hold still.
Okay. This medical exam goes on for another minute or two. The big question is, will Juliana be able to reproduce within the Reich? Is she going to bear children? Is she going to bear Aryan children? We have some other scenes where she's contributing to the women's club, the ladies' club. She's dressed in a very fashionable dress. Her hair's a bit shorter, and she's helping to prepare a big swastika flower arrangement for someone's funeral. So she's supposed to give back to the community in the American Reich because the American Reich has agreed to take her and pay for her daily life. Just to have a quick idea of Juliana in the neutral zone, where mainly she's shooting people.
Are you okay?
So we don't have the time to watch other extracts, but in the neutral zone, she's very much a resistance leader. She's very much active, shooting, like I said. And one thing that Joe Blake says to her, because she doesn't have any money, he pays for her meal. And Joe Blake says, I do help people out, but only the pretty ones. So it's her physical attractiveness that draws Joe's attention and enables her to have access to supplies in this zone. The Amazon series, The Man in the High Castle, provides viewers with many striking images of what the world could be like, or how like the actual world is to the imaginary one. In particular, the Nazi iconography has been particularly criticized and or admired, and that's something I would like to continue studying later. I'm a bit fearful that what we're seeing as far as images in this series is food for fodder for the neo-Nazi movement and eventually some alt-right. Presenting a storyline that takes place across 3 different political and national zones creates a character with 3 personalities. Despite the supposed whiteness of her character, Juliana Crane's characteristics reshuffle according to the zone in which she finds herself. Some elements, such as her penetrability, remain at the forefront despite her location. But other questions related to her position as a racial minority or majority fluctuate according to her geographic location. For this reason, I believe it is important to include questions of space and place when analyzing intersectionality. Thank you very much.